Well, tributes continue to pour in after the passing of Riky Rick. His untimely death has brought about questions to many who recall the rapper sharing his experiences about suffering from depression. According to the World Health Organization's statistics on global suicide trends, men are more likely to die by suicide than women in South Africa. This has brought more attention to the state of mental health amongst men and the stigma that comes with it, as men are expected to be strong and just silently deal with their pain. Well, to speak more on how mental issues affect men, I'm joined now by Nkosikhona Malinga-Mnisi to share his own experience and insight from living with depression. Nkosikhona, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your time and your courage to share with us your journey in dealing with depression, in the light, of course, of the death of Riky Rick. We don't have many details, but just the previous comment that was made there was that we need to be very sensitive and careful how we deal with the issue of suicide when it comes out in the media, particularly on social media platforms. If I can begin there, what is your view around that?
Well, firstly, thank you very much, Dan, for having me on the program, and good afternoon to all your viewers. I think the issue of sensitivity when it comes to mental health care, because we often speak of depression as the sort of the first point of reference because it's one that we are familiar with, but it's a whole host of issues. We need to be a society that is not shocked when certain events take place within our country, within our world. We need to be very sensitive. We need to always be on the lookout. So it's very devastating that certain events, when it happens to people that are in the public space and are idolized and have got fans and a following, that we all of a sudden take up the task of only then addressing the issue. Mental health needs to be a conversation that we need to have every day. And I can't speak enough about the importance of sensitivity when it comes to this issue, because it's one that we have to be very careful around, even in facilitating conversations around it. So it's absolutely important that we remain a very aware society, a society that is very sensitive to issues, and we do reflection. I think this time, having looked at the devastation that has hit the creative industry and South Africa as a whole with the passing of Ndade Patrick Shai and now Riky Rick, it really raises awareness, and we need to really look and take this opportunity to reflect, because we're very quick to speak about issues, to respond to certain things, but we don't take the opportunity to listen and reflect.
Well, what's your experience? What have you been battling with when it comes to mental health? If you don't mind me asking, and if you're comfortable sharing with our viewers.
No, absolutely, Dan. I think it's very important to share. I think it's a bold step that I myself have had to take, because I think in my work as a broadcaster, I have found a sense of advocacy. And this is one issue that's been very personal for me, where I've been battling mental illness since 2018, from depression, anxiety, heightened levels of stress. And, it's infiltrated into really causing me a very slow lockdown into how I respond to certain things, into how I deal with certain challenges, and how I tackle certain things. And I think it really takes one to be able to penetrate into spaces where we haven't had these conversations before. So I've been a mental health care patient since 2018. I sort of have it as a chronic illness. And I must mention, Dan, at this point, that it's very important, and I want to say this as slow as I possibly can, to understand that mental illness, and I could name a wide variety, but obviously the ones that we're more familiar with, depression, stress, and anxiety, right? It's very important to understand, and I'm no sort of expert on this, but it's very important to understand that it's an actual clinical illness, right, where there's an imbalance within the brain and brain waves and activity. So it's important to treat it like all other illnesses. When we have conversations about diabetes, HIV/AIDS, hypertension, and all those health-related matters, we need to make sure that mental health also makes it to that list. So as a young Black man in South Africa, having to navigate through a debilitating economic system, a lack of direction in the country, and my own internal conflict that I have with myself, because it's an internal fight, Britain, and yes, external factors do play sort of a huge role, but it's an internal conflict with your thoughts where you could either be this or that. You know, you could switch from being happy and sad at the same time. And there's a lot of vast emotions that brew within you. So to, you know, encapsulate my journey, which I think is very important to speak about, I'm a current survivor. Because I say current because I'm not really sure how tomorrow's going to look like or the near future is going to look like. So I've also had the luxury, and which I call a luxury, especially in the context of South Africa, of having access to private health care when it comes to my illness. So I've had the luxury of being taken care of by a subdivision of the Netcare group, which deals with behavior therapy, countless admissions, medication, and vigorous therapy.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. That was a very comprehensive response. Thanks, Nkosikhona. Now, just to share very briefly this time, I mean, when did you become aware that you've got a mental health illness like depression, and what were the first steps? Because sometimes you hear all these kind of expressions that stigmatize mental health illness.
Yeah. So I think, Britain, as I've mentioned, 2018 was when I was officially diagnosed. There could have been other signs, and perhaps because it was a very unfamiliar territory for me, in that, you know, I come from an African family, you know, in the rural areas, and then sort of moved to the urban side of Johannesburg and Gauteng. I was not familiar with a lot of the terminology around this and how to sort of identify signs and symptoms. But what I could say, I think, you know, for me, I'll speak about my own signs and symptoms where I'm overly stressed at times, and it causes health-related matters where it could pass off as hypertension, but it's a stress-related issue where you overanalyze certain situations, where you overthink, where you are constantly in a state where you're thinking about one thing and you aren't able to effectively function well. And I think what we've been taught, especially as young Black men, is that we need to have a mask that we need to put on every single day. So we've got the ability to hide it very well. But the fact of the matter, behind that mask, there lies a lot of childhood trauma, which is...
And I guess that mask as well has to be firm for somebody who's in the public domain like yourself, who's a broadcaster.
No, absolutely, Britain, absolutely. And I think one of the most important things to note as well is that we really need to look at how do we sort of advocate for such issues? How do we as a media sort of, share information on such? How do we tackle these conversations and also sort of have guidelines that are really carefully looked at? It's very difficult as someone who's in the public eye, as someone that's, up and coming in the industry of broadcasting. It's essentially difficult.
Yeah, we are ending now. We have less than a minute to go. Just very briefly, if there was one thing you'd like to share, to leave as a word of advice or encouragement to anybody who's watching this, who think I'm busy, maybe I might be, I need help, what would that word be? What would that message be?
Well, thanks very much for allowing me to do that, Brother. And I'll simply put it to the end, but I want to make a request. I want to make a request to public, private sectors, to all the organizations, SADC, Lifeline, to really, really, really push the narrative of addressing this issue. And to all the survivors, to all those that have lost loved ones, who've lost the battle to mental illness, I wish you strength above anything else. And as I always say, my sort of DMs on the social media platforms, I avail myself to people, and most importantly, I hear you, and I feel you, I hear what you're saying, and most importantly, I love you, and that's the most important message to spread love. Thank you very much, Britain.